will be some people coming in as we go. But thank you again for being here, and I'll turn it over to Melissa with Waterloo Greenway.
Thank you, Laura. Well, good evening. Thank you all for being here at our Palm Park Design and Community Conversation. This is our third phase of our community engagement. So if you've participated in our conversations last year, thank you for being here. If this is your first conversation, thank you for being here too. All of the feedback that we have received is critical for our design process. Hopefully you will see your feedback reflected in the preliminary design that you'll see in the presentation today. It's an important process for us. We have been having conversations with the community since 2016 to talk about the history of the park, the community's history and memories, which are very important. We know the importance of the park and its connection to Palm School, to the East Austin neighborhood, and the history of the park and its connection to the Mexican American neighborhood. So we're taking all that into consideration as we think about the restoration of Palm Park in the future. So before we get started, I wanted to go ahead and recognize our project team in the room today. So if you are with the Waterloo Greenway staff, please say hello to everybody. If you're with our design team from Michael Van Valkenburg team, please raise your hand. Hello, thank you. And our friends at the Parks and Recreation Department, please raise your hand. All right. Thanks, team. And thank you to Laura as well, who's working with us on community engagement. So just to kind of set the conversation, we're going to go ahead and have a little refresher on the Waterloo Greenway project and give a little overview. So the Waterloo Greenway Conservancy is working with the City of Austin to create a park system through downtown Austin. We're working to create a space that promotes play, health, and wellness, and create a space to connect community for the benefit of all. This map represents our vision to create a space of 35 acres of park space in the eastern section of downtown. So when we're done, we'll have an area that's 1.5 miles of a connected trail that extends from 15th Street down to Lady Bird Lake. We're accomplishing that in phases. So what you see on the side of the screen in orange is Waterloo Park. Has anybody been to Waterloo Park before? All right. So we know Waterloo Park has a very long history in Austin of being a place for special events and all kinds of activities. So we were really excited to be able to continue that tradition when we reopened the park in 2021. So this is a quick snapshot of just some of the activities and some numbers from last year. So we're really excited to be able to host over 100 community programs that are free to the public. Things like fitness classes, movies in the park, creek show, Dia de los Muertos that we do every year. We also do concerts, and we have different volunteer activities. But we're continuing the work from there. So we have phase 2 underway right now. So that's the section that you see on the left of the screen in yellow. So that will connect 4th Street to Lady Bird Lake. The work that we're doing there includes a lot of creek reconstruction, a new trail along the creek, and some new bridges connecting over the creek. The experience along the confluence will be really unique. You'll be able to experience nature in the middle of downtown, so it's really exciting. If you're ever in the area, you can see the work happening right now. So we're really thrilled to be able to continue the work of the project. And of course, we're here today because we're talking about what's next. What's important about the conversation is the work that we're doing right now in the confluence includes reconstruction of the creek and work to help us build into Palm Park. So we want to set up the work for Palm Park. So the conversations that we're having today are really important. So once we finish the confluence, we can move right into Palm Park and continue the work. So we have, as I mentioned, we have done 3 phases of community engagement. And Laura will talk to us a little bit about that, just to have everyone be familiar with all the work we've done up to this point.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, so I hear this clicker's tricky, so we gotta be over here. So this work can't be possible without your voices and without you being involved and coming to the meetings. And we know that takes time, and it takes time out of your day. You have a long day at work, and then you come out here and support us, and that means the world to us. When we started this last summer, we really wanted to launch the project, and we called that phase the grounding. And I got to meet with many community members one-on-one and talk to them, but really the grounding was, where are we starting from, what's happening, let's hear on the work that we did, as Melissa mentioned, in 2016. And then we wanted to envision. So you're gonna see some photos at the end of this slide presentation, many that you attended, where you came together and you kind of showed us what your vision was. We had youngsters writing on the wall, showing us what they envisioned in the park. We had many of you telling us what was important to you. And we really focused on themes that we heard, how you wanted to see play, how you wanted to see all sorts of ways that you would envision the park. And when we got through that phase, there is a wealth of data, and now we're at a stage where we call co-creation, which we're very excited to have MVVA here and their team to talk to you about what it's gonna look like, what are the concepts to come. So it's also important when we talk about community engagement, what does the timeline look like? We're really grateful to everyone that was on this process. And we started in June, but we're here now in 2024 in our public meeting, as Melissa said, in phase 3. And when we like to do some of this work, we have to make sure that we're reaching the community in all different ways. There's not just one way. So we want to talk a little bit about all the strategies that we use to make sure the public was involved. And I'll be showing you the numbers we have up to this point. But we tabled at many events, many community events, particularly in this area. We spent time flyering. We went door to door and block walked. We also did email campaigns. Some of you are probably on that email listserv. We worked with partners also to promote our work that we did in engagement. We met with community leaders and talked to them about some of their visions for this. And of course, as I spoke with some of you as you came in, you always talk about Waterloo Greenway's great social media, and that you hear about this through Instagram and those ways. So we're always making sure we're maintaining a diverse way in which you're hearing about the work that we're doing. So what did this result to? So here are some of the numbers. We saw over 1,900 people that engaged with us in some form or fashion. And we're really proud of that work because it took us about 3 to 4 months that we spent time. We went to pop-up events, tabling. We also had an online survey that many of you participated in. And then we also did our small group conversations. We also wanted to be conscientious. Do we have any Palm School alum here? Yay! In many of our meetings, we had school alum attend, and what's really important about that is, as you know, the park is adjacent to the school. And their experiences and how they created play and how they enjoyed the park is very fundamental to the things we thought about as we thought about concept design. We want to make sure that we're restoring, but we're also preserving the history of what it meant. And you're going to see some really exciting things. I'm already getting chills about what we heard when people said, you know, sometimes we created our own play, and we're trying to rebuild that vision of what that park meant to so many people. All right, it's also important when we do community engagement on who's represented. And the reason why I love showing this is that some of the data that we collected is we want to know where people are from and how they're engaging with our project. And if this particular park is going to be in 78702, we want to make sure those voices are most prevalent. But we also know this is a park for all. And so we also made sure that some of the areas represented in other parts of Austin were also involved with the project. One of the really great things we learned early on was that many of our Latino families have moved southeast, northeast, or many of them reside in the Eastern Crescent. And why that's important is because if you look at where Palm School is in Palm Park, a large majority of our Latino families resided there, but many of them have moved. And so you will see here the 78744, 78745. We saw a lot of families that told us, oh, my mom still has a house there, or we decided to move to this part of town because we could not afford to live downtown anymore. So we wanted to let you know this is something we took into effect. We want you to know that the voices of the individuals that have participated in this project have primarily been from Central East Austin. And let's see, clicker. All right, so this is what you're gonna start to see in this next phase, and I'm just gonna go over this really briefly with you. But we had about 632 comments that we received, and we asked, how would you like to see the history and culture reflected in Palm Park? And here were some of the things that rose to the top when people said, when I think of history, when I think of what I wanna see to represent my culture, they mentioned these things. Maybe murals, the possibility of ways to honor the pool that was previously there. How do we celebrate the Mexican American history? How do we recognize the Palm School alum? And then what are ways that we can integrate stories from the past, present, and future? So these are things that our design team took into effect as they're thinking about what the future of this is gonna look like. Now, how do we use this space? When we asked how we can use it, you heard oftentimes from the community, we want spaces to gather. We want spaces to walk. There was people that talked about the importance now of gardening and meditation, and how can we create spaces in the park where it's not always busy, but I can also have some time to ground myself. And then, of course, making sure it's a family-friendly space and that there's connection to east to west. As you know, this park and where it resides, it's in the corner there of Isas of Chavez and 35, but people want to know how's it going to be connected. And then the last two questions that we also asked and talked about was how is the redesign going to transform the surrounding areas? And this is a really beautiful thing because you think about, while this is being designed and reconfigured, how do we affect the other spaces around it? And so what you told us is that you wanted to make sure it was still accessible to East Austin, that this still was part of your history and culture, that we were also having places in which there was cultural anchors. As you're starting to see Austin and the way that we're building our spaces, when you think about cultural districts, some that are coming in the future, how are ways that we're anchoring this park in that tradition and that history? And then at the end, how do we want folks to feel? The moment they walk into this park, what is that feeling that we're gonna have about it? And here's some of the things you told us. You want it to be peaceful and tranquil. You want it to be an oasis. You want it to be something that's informative as well as an educational space. You want it to feel natural, that it doesn't feel too structured. And then more importantly, that it's welcoming and that it seems like it's something honoring the history. So this is just a recap. There was a lot of information we received in the small group conversations, but we wanted to just briefly go over, and here's some pictures of, you may see some of familiar faces in there, of all the fun that we had during the time that we took opportunities to talk to so many different people. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to MVVA, Gulliver.
I'm not gonna use that. Welcome everyone. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to speak with you. I just wanted to build on a little bit of what Laura said. You know, some people can be cynical about like community meetings and whatnot, but I just want you to know that as professionals who build parks all the time, we are filled with optimism about that. It's like a park is not a great thing without people, and so we have to know what the users want to do and what they feel. So I just wanted to start off with that note, and we'll talk more about this. Really, I'm gonna cover a few bits of context. Many of you already know what the Waterloo Greenway is, but I thought it might be nice to share that the Greenway, if you think about it, was this blighted, down there kind of space that isn't intuitive about how to get to. And so this competition and the idea of this project was, how do we make this space that seemingly no one wants an invitation unequivocally public and connecting all sorts of parts of the city that had backed up to it but had not really been acknowledging what this was. And so this space needs to be for all of you. And then we look to the parks, which are really important invitations into that space, because they're at street level and you can see people, and we're all social animals, and we think about, oh, well, I see people, what else can I explore? So the role of parks is super important. But with Palm Park, there's a special relationship to it as well, because as you all know, Palm Park was once very connected to East Austin, and the highway kind of cut that off. And this is really important to kind of take this thing that had been lost its connection and embrace it with the Greenway. So its new front door for now will be the Greenway itself. And so if you're coming under the highway at 4th or somewhere else, you hit the Greenway and you can come into this. Of course, there's all the other opportunities that the Conservancy has been really important in supporting, like the Palm School, fighting for that to get to be an important connection, and working tirelessly on the Convention Center redevelopment in I-35 about what opportunities that could mean for connecting the community back to Palm Park. So looking in here, this is downtown Austin. Things are changing fast. And it's only, there's part of this along the creek that is being built as part of the confluence. So we're left with a little under 2 acres, but it's a really important 2 acres that keystones into the city. And again, we need to get Palm School to be part of it. If the highway changes, we need that to be part of the story. So in a weird way, what we're talking about investing in now will lead the spirit and add fuel to the fire to make this well wired into all these communities. So I wanted to say, just as part of this context, reflecting what all the input that Laura and the Conservancy have pulled from all of you as our priorities. Again, first, the park's history is, we hear you loud and clear about how important that needs to be in the storytelling and what you see and feel in this space. Fight for the connection and make sure that that's not precluded to have a connection from Palm School, and to think really carefully about the trees in the park. There are actually quite a few very special trees there, which we want to honor, and of course this is a city that loves its trees, and we want to think creatively about incorporating that. And then connecting to Waterloo, this new front door I mentioned, there's a lot coming in with the design of that space that I think can, with the spirit of renaturalizing the creek, that can kind of make a new kind of park. It's not just a lawn with some things in it and a few nice trees. It can be something that's really exciting. And I know this is getting a little more technical, but we have to think, we've heard over and over how important family and play is for this space. And there's actually the relationship of the trees help us make little separate areas of play, which is important. We can't have the 2-year-olds playing with the 15-year-olds. That's kind of not good. And then we need to carefully consider the edges. And the edges are in flux. Right now, they're kind of all street levels, and there's some parking lots right there at the Palm School, but all of that could change, except for this connection to the creek. So again, I just want to say thank you for all your efforts. This is great to come into this process with so much information directly from all of you into the working medium and processes for designing something like this. So what did we do? We took the many, many hundreds and hundreds of comments and we organized them into categories to be able to help present back to you how we're thinking about your comments. So not just taking hundreds of comments and responding to each one in kind, we try to come up with something that we can synthesize your input back to you. So it's these 5 categories, starting with parks, trees, then family and play, gathering space, places of memory, and then the community identity. So you'll see these color coding throughout the presentation, and these little speech bubbles, like a cartoon, that are quotes directly from your comments. It's not all of them, but we picked a lot of the things that represented a lot of the sentiment that the global amount of comments reflected for us. So let's go into the first one, park trees. This is a little more straightforward, but again, the context is we're building a green city. There's been a tremendous loss of tree canopy in downtown. So every opportunity as part of the Greenway to change that, given all the heat island effects from parking lots and buildings, the stormwater getting pushed into the creek, and we want to build something that's a healthy landscape. People really respond to that. People don't respond to an unhealthy landscape very well. So the first group of some of these comments about just the park trees, about really using the trees to think about nature walks for children and adults. That kind of, it was really a sophisticated comment about like, we needed this to be intergenerational. Like that's a really important part of parks is that you have multiple generations enjoying this space together, including story time space. It's a lovely idea. We're gonna show you something that really is directly responding to that. Places of respite. These trees are already really, a lot of them are very mature and create incredible harbors already. And there's a lot going on. You have an elevated highway, you have construction, etc. So first I want to talk about how much change is already happening by the confluence being built. There's almost 200,000 plants, natives, tremendous variety coming in on that western edge of the park and starting to really change the character. And we want to continue that based on your comments about looking for that diversity and excitement in the kind of botanical aspect. We also are thinking about, as lovely as the existing trees are, we want to build on what's there with younger trees. Natural environments don't have trees that are all the same size. You have trees that are smaller and medium and bigger. And so we want to add in all these trees that build this frame that's part of that, creating that oasis, one of your comments, in the city. And then the story tree comment, just directly, we love that idea. I can't tell you how much that really was moving, especially with these really interesting Durand oaks, which are kind of rare to find in the city. They have all these interesting knobs and ledges, and that is just kind of like a fantasy storybook already. So now the thing about old trees in this city is you have to work very carefully with arborists to not impact the tree root zone around the tree. So we have this idea of being able to work with arborists to carefully integrate what we're calling animal stones, which are just stones where you can kind of create the narrative of sitting on an animal while listening to a story being read to you. Now, we could do some off-the-shelf concrete pieces, but this could also be an opportunity to engage an artist that's local to the city, and maybe that becomes part of like that specificity that makes Palm Park and is responding to this community and this place. So we're just showing you, we're gonna take those comments and take a few of those ideas and start putting them onto the plan. And as we go layer by layer, we're gonna be building the plan in front of you. So this next category, which of course is incredibly rich, is talking about family and play. And there's just something about incorporating play elements into a park that is just energizing for a park. It just really brings life into a physical space. Kids are don't have that like the sense of boundary as much, and they just do things that they come natural, and it's so happy. So we have so many comments here about playscapes, but also things that are calmer for exploration, nature play. You're really in water features and places just to gather as a family. So we love the range of comments, and we're doing our best to try to get at all in here in some form. So one of our favorite topics, and it's so important, we work with a lot of play psychologists to talk about some of the deepest, most satisfying forms of play are with nature play, where there aren't necessarily rules, like I see a slide, I need to go climb up and go down the slide. In nature play, you're letting the children kind of explore, like, what am I supposed to do here? And it's a really important developmental tool. So we have sensory play, something where you can make sound in the park. This is what you see there is something that you can like step on and play specific notes. We think that's a wonderfully animating thing to have in a park, that you can actually hear play even before you see it. We have scramble paths like you see at Waterloo Park. We take this reclaimed limestone byproduct material and make paths that meander through trees and vegetation. We have something called the Stick Lab. And this is kind of inspired by a lot of programs around the country where you just where the Parks Department would bring a fresh supply of sticks and kids can just make stuff out of it. And then we have something called the Nest. It's basically a tree house, right? If you don't have access to a tree house if you don't have a backyard, we have a great idea about building a tree house essentially for you in the middle of the park. So then this whole idea of family gathering and family space, we have to be very attentive to not just a safe but also exciting play environment for kids, but what is the caregiver doing? Hopefully it's not just getting on their screen, but we understand some of that will ultimately have to happen. But it's about, and if you have kids in different age groups, you want to be able to see your 4-year-old and your 12-year-old, right? That's a hard thing to calibrate. They need to be separated, but you need to see both. So we're being very considerate to how to find a place that's shaded and you have the comfort of watching your 2 differently aged kids and not be worried. Now you brought up this comment about flowers, plants, and animals. And we love this as a theme to bring into a park system that's all about nature, right? So one of the things that's fun is just kids love animals. It's just one of those go-to things, like how do I draw animals? And so we have some pictures of Texas animals, and maybe that's a possible theme. Now I'm cheating a little bit because we've done this before, and it's a lot of fun. One of the things you do is you take an animal, in this case a blue heron, and we built this in Tulsa where we take something small and make it larger than life. And that is just like, that alone just titillates the child's imagination. They're just already really excited. And the fact that there's also a slide and you can climb inside of it and look at its head is all sorts of fun. Yeah, see? And then we're doing this also in Houston, where we're building this armadillo. But what we're really most excited about for this park and this community is something that we've only done once before. And if you like this idea, we need to hear from you, where maybe we're not the designers of this animal. And we ran a workshop with this company called Monstrum that builds these wonderful animals. And we do a workshop that would be sponsored by the Conservancy. People and the children have a wonderful imagination about animals. So in Detroit, what we did is we had them make lots of little models with pipe cleaners and clay. And we are being honest and following through on the kids' little models and working through with the manufacturer to develop these things, and they're now being installed on the Detroit riverfront. So I think that's kind of an amazing story. The community can produce this, and there's this sense of pride, and maybe 1 or 2 lucky kids are saying, that's my invention, that's my design. So water feature, I mean, I know how much a water feature is appreciated in a place that gets this hot. So we are totally immediately in support of that. And what we're proposing though is not a splash pad. And I want to explain why. The worst thing about having a water feature in a park is if it's not turned on. If you're in a drought,
or if it has bacteria.
Or if it has bacteria, that's all I will add that. And it can be turned off because it breaks. There's a lot of maintenance problems and it takes a while to fix. That's a real disappointment if you're traveling to get to a place and it's not turned on. And the other thing is, or if there's a drought alert and you can't use all the water. So our idea here is we want to make a field of poles and use a misting spray to make this immersive environment that's kinetic, gives you relief from heat, and it's something to explore. We think if there's like this cloud in one corner of the park, And you can walk inside it and there's an interior, but you also see it from the outside. That can be very exciting. Here's the advantages. From a maintenance perspective, it's really easy. If something clogs up, you just replace a very cheap part. It doesn't get shut down. And we believe this is under the threshold for the city water consumption, that if there's a drought alert, it doesn't need to be turned off. So we think that this is it uses so little water to make this spray. This is a very exciting idea to be able to have it present more often than not. So I know this one had a lot, but we're building all these pieces we just mentioned and found spaces to tuck this in amidst the trees. And it's really on that idea of, in the Northeast, you have the 5 to 12-year-olds play space, that bigger, maybe it's an animal kind of play feature. To the Southeast is where you have the 2 to 5 age group. Again, that's kind of like, because there's a grade change there, we can make a very protected environment. And then coming off of that to the west is where the nature play would be, because you have a great cluster of trees and then the creek landscape with the confluence created as a backdrop. Okay, so gathering space. We got a lot of comments about this, and we kind of understand that, because one of the things about public space is not everyone wants to sit on a bench that seats 3 or 4 people. There's got to be a kind of a range of things, of choices. You're like, I want to sit in the shade, I want to sit with my family. In this situation, I want a big table and have lunch or a picnic with my family. So, and we heard a lot about how important that is in this community. Barbecues, birthdays, we heard about decks, just having movable seating, which is hard to do in a park, but we think we can do this, and terrace seating. So we've developed a language of 4 different ways to really gather. One, we're gonna have an open lawn, which you can bring a blanket. There are very few flat spaces in this creek landscape, so they're tremendously valuable to be able to be flexible and accommodate this kind of activity. We are using tree decks, and I'll explain some of this, that the tree decks we try to use them when we're around the trees that we love as well, because we need to protect that root zone, so we're really in favor of that. And because we're talking about playscape and we need to create a boundary around it, we think we can develop a movable furniture strategy that won't walk away. We can talk more about that. And then we do have a little bit of topography on the south and east side there. We think we can hold back and make more flat space for play, but then also use that change in grade to make some terrace seating. And we think all of this should be in the park. And that's what we've drawn, is that you can see this labeled where we have a safe zone for a lot of movable chairs, and for whatever kind of event you might want to have with your family or other groups. Terrace seating at the edges, so you can look out as a caregiver onto your kids' activity. A tree deck behind the shelter house, because you have 2 really big trees there, and we'll talk about that just shortly. And then an open lawn in between the very natural, newly rebuilt creek and this playscape is a flat lawn. Okay, so we heard a lot about, we heard a lot about the care we need to have for the history of this park and how to memorialize this. Half of them were about the shelter house, and half of them about the pool that was removed, but had held very special emotion in this community. So what we're going to do in those 2 instances is where you have a photo of the structure today, and in the case of the pool, a historic photo. We're going to talk about this idea of transforming it into a space that's really useful for the park. And that was one of the main comments we heard from you, is like, this should be used. This is not just a fossil or an artifact. So the way we're going to do this is first, and I want to point out Murray Legg from Murray Legg Architects, who've done a lot of great work in really understanding this structure. And one of the things is, some of this is historic and some of it has been modern additions. And we look at the roof structure, and The roof, it's not really feasible to rebuild the roof as it was, or as it would or the more modern version of that, because we'd have to take down a lot of the stone, and we don't want to. We think the stonework is fabulous, but the concrete and veneer of the stone is in really good shape. We can use that. So we have this idea, or I should say, Murray had this fantastic idea of putting kind of a plane, a roof that allows several things to be maybe of benefit to the structure. One, we can expand the amount of shade that this produces. Two, it creates a great backdrop to really appreciate the craft and this historically important style of shelter houses that not as many exist in the city anymore. And then having an open air circulation in this, that, you know, we don't need to have closed off spaces for bathrooms. We don't have to talk too much more about that. Another advantage would be we could create a wonderful way to make this feel safe by bouncing light up on that surface and having a very ambient environment that highlights, we think, very handsomely the stonework and the form of this, but also just elevates its presence, which would be in the middle of this playscape. We build a deck to eliminate the step, the barrier for accessibility, but also protect the tree roots that are around that east end of the building. So the north side would be, there are two doors on east and west side, and those would be for individual bathrooms. And then on the south, there'd be another bathroom, maybe family, we don't know yet. We'll think more about that, but also some storage space. It's always important when you, in a play landscape, to have storage. Maybe it's games that could be rented and whatnot, but this isn't the only uses we are entertaining in this, because we want this to be a really, again, the center of the playscape, full of activity and not just thought of as a bathroom. You told us all these wonderful stories about it being used for plays, the lending library. And so we've developed this plan where, you know, on the side, that's the 2 to 5 area, we could use that deck area that we're making and have stroller storage, or maybe a lending library could come back. On the north side, we can put the places where you wash your hands. Instead of doing that in the bathrooms, that's part of, you know, the exterior experience of sitting underneath trees. We did that really successfully, I think, in Waterloo Park, and it's for a bathroom experience in the public, it's really elevated and really quite pleasant.
What was that shelter used for?
I'm sorry?
What was that shelter utilized for back then?
Oh, it was bathrooms, and then, but also
And what else?
We heard stories of it being used as a backdrop for plays and skits, but also the play pad in front of it for Foursquare, which we heard in your comments. And again, we've been talking about, we think that's a wonderful idea to take that memory of using that as a play space itself and create some, maybe not just the Foursquare, but maybe some other geometry that could be just whimsical and fun. So then we're now going to shift to the pool. That's okay. And we heard a lot about, you know, how much the pool is missed, and we want to record some of the history somehow in this and commemorate it. So here's a historic photo of the pool. There was a raised curb that marked this kind of unusual shape. This is not a pool with lanes, it just had these rounded corners, and it was kind of this big tub. And we want to mark that shape by bringing some columns up to support a shade structure. Shade is critically important in any park, especially a playscape like this. The idea, and this is not a design, but just an idea, was that shade does not just have to be like a solid, kind of heavy thing. It could be made out of materials that capture the kinetic aspects of light and wind and kind of move, which kind of recalls what light and wind does to water, but it's up above you. It's like you're in the pool. We then would make the space beneath this, we'd be thinking about that. How can we use this for the gatherings, the family gatherings, the quinceañeras, the birthday parties? How do we let that be a space for all of that activity? So we think that developing some large community, very unique and distinct just for this park, community tables, for that to be used would be really nice. And to just sponsor, it can be meditative and calm, whether it's not being used for an event, but then it also can facilitate multiple events in one space. And so this is a plan looking down at it, looking at, Peace Park and how they had those long tables, but instead of rows, like this isn't a beer garden, I'm not criticizing Peace Park, but we think the pool was set at a very unusual, it's not on the grid of the street, right? It's kind of cranked, and we think that we want to think very carefully about the distribution and orientation of these community tables to be looking into the park, especially this new creek landscape. And then having open areas, which we're calling impromptu space, that might be 15 or 20 feet in diameter, where you're presenting someone at the quinceañera, you have the magician at the birthday party, or just getting around and blowing out some birthday candles. So we want to be communal, but also be able to host little events. So between this, we think we have the shelter house that is the anchor for all of this playscape, and people can use every side of it. And then the pool is this, by putting a really animating canopy over it, becomes the high reader and identity mark for everyone going by on the creek path. And so we think that's very exciting as a mark within the city and an icon. Lastly, and I hope I'm not going on too long, we want to talk about the community identity. There were comments about how do we bring that and integrate that into the park, celebrating la cultura. And we have a lot of comments about murals and monuments, engaging local artists, and telling a story throughout the park. So one of the things that I've often stayed in East Austin whenever I come to Austin, and I've just loved, now this was like 10 years ago and I know a lot's changed, but I've always just loved how people put things in their yards. The sculptures, the kind of little personal fantasies and what they plant in their yards. And we've taken photos of them, and we just thought this theme of tell a story of the neighborhood could be partially told with kind of things you wouldn't expect to see in a park, you might see in someone's yard, and making it very familiar by using that plant material. And so we're really excited about the idea, and maybe it's not just plants, maybe it's actually some pieces of sculpture or whatnot that are actually from this community that could be integrated. That's something to continue to discuss. We also have 4 entries outside of the entry from the creek that we think are really important moments to celebrate the identity of the community, because people pass through these thresholds. Instead of just making it an anonymous path connecting to a sidewalk, we want to celebrate that moment like you're going into a new world. So we're planning on one being at Palm School. Probably wouldn't be built with this project, but we want to plan for that being an opportunity. The way Sabine can connect from the south. And we have 2 entries at 3rd Street. One that's right at where the 3rd Street Bridge crosses the creek, that's more for pedestrians. But then we need a place where we can have cars dropping people off. It's very important in a play environment. So we're making a separate entry for that as well. And each of these, we have a few photos of, there seems to be both, an important tradition in the city of these kind of arches that are engage artisans to make a kind of a character statement about the identity of the community. And we think this is an important opportunity. So again, by infusing the middle of the park with sort of planting you might not usually see in a park, and it feels like a more familiar yard and these 4 gateways, this is how we integrate the identity. So when we put this all together, this is the plan you see today. And I really think it's been so directly tied to your comments. We're really excited about this plan. It's a very sweet park, but we think it can now be a really sweet and active park with all this going on. This is a cross section, just thinking about all those activities from the New Creek landscape with an elevated walk that's going to point your view straight into the middle of Palm Park, where you see the open lawn. Here's that little nest. I didn't cover that as much, but it's great to have a little tree house exactly in the middle of the park where kids get to surveil both people on the trail, but also the playscape. I think it's a great, kids love to have a position like that. The play pad, the iconic larger than life play structures, and then spaces on decks and movable furniture areas where all sorts of things can happen in the park. So with that, I hope I haven't bored you, but I want you, what you find on all these tables are these little placemats that have a little synopsis of some of those ideas located in the plan. I should probably hand this off now to someone else to talk about what we're going to do next.
Thank
Laura.
you, Oliver. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
So we're going to give you guys, we're going to give you some time, and if you're sitting on the exterior, we would love for everyone to participate at the table. So what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes is you have on here the park that you can get some time to look